Hey guys, tonight we travel deep into the bitter heart of a medieval winter. No electricity, no insulation, no double-glazed windows or weighted blankets. Just you, a cold timber cottage, and an endless howl of wind that creeps through every gap in the woodwork. The kind of cold that doesn't just nip at your nose. It climbs into your bones, settles behind your eyes, and makes you question why anyone ever chose to live this far north without a thermostat. Outside, it's pitch black. Not city dark. No street lamps, no glow from a neighbor's porch. Just the kind of darkness that feels like it has weight. And inside? A dim fire sputters in the corner hearth. The smell of charred wood mixes with something vaguely sour. You've grown so used to it, you don't even flinch anymore. The straw mattress beneath you crunches slightly when you shift. Don't think about what's in it. Trust me. Just don't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The firelight flickers just enough to cast shadows that dance across the walls. Wooden planks warped with time and moisture. The gaps between them whistle softly, a ghostly lullaby played by the wind. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing full well it won't help. Cloaks in the 14th century aren't made for comfort. They're made of wool, often still faintly smelling of the sheep it came from, and they itch like a curse. You lie there, eyes open, staring at the timber beams overhead, trying to decide which is worse, the cold or the thought of getting up to start your day in it. There's no central heating, no cozy slippers, just a bucket of cold water in the corner to splash on your face. And you hope it's not frozen solid again. Your breath fogs the air as you sit up. You're still alive. Congratulations. Statistically speaking, that's already impressive. You probably won't survive this winter, at least not by modern standards. Historians estimate that infant mortality rates hovered around 30%, and those who made it past childhood were lucky to dodge frostbite, pneumonia, or death by soup. You swing your legs over the side of the bed. The stone floor greets your bare feet like a slap from a glacier. There's no point in delaying. The morning chores don't care about your comfort. The chickens are probably already squawking, sensing the faintest gray edge of dawn. Outside your door, the wind greets you with an immediate rush of disdain. You stagger out into the tiny yard, really more of a patch of trampled snow and frozen mud, to check the chicken coop. The hens stare back with the silent judgment of creatures who would eat you if roles were reversed. You scoop a handful of feed, scattering it with fingers that already can't feel anything. By the time you return indoors, your ears ache, and you're fairly sure your toes have either frozen off or achieved sentience. You stomp your feet near the hearth, the fire now nothing but dull orange embers. Time to relight it. The flint is cold and uncooperative. Sparks fly, but the kindling smokes, coughs, and threatens to die before finally, blessedly, catching. You lean in, eyes watering, hands outstretched, absorbing the meager warmth like it's sunlight from heaven. And then comes the bread. Your breakfast. A hunk of what might generously be called grain bread, though it more closely resembles a brick. It was baked 2 days ago, and that was the freshest thing you've had in weeks. You gnaw at it slowly, jaw aching. No toaster, no butter, just this dense, cold chew, speckled with bits of, well, you tell yourself that's probably rye. Probably. And here's the kicker. This bread might have been made using ale instead of clean water. Because water? That stuff's dangerous. Rivers are where people dump waste, wash clothes, and occasionally die. So ale, even the weak, sour stuff they serve to children, is considered safer. You sip it slowly, lukewarm, slightly fizzy, and not particularly comforting. But at least it doesn't kill you. As you chew and sip and stare into the fire, your stomach growls, not out of hunger, but out of protest. Your body is already burning through the thin calories, trying to keep you warm. You'll need to eat more later. Something fatty, if you're lucky. Maybe a slice of salt pork. Maybe a turnip. Maybe, if the ice saint is feeling generous, a stew with a hint of actual meat. You hear something thump on the roof. Snow sliding off in chunks. It startles you at first, but you're used to it now. You listen to the wind, the low creak of the beams above, and the subtle sound of your own heartbeat. You made it through another night, but winter is only just beginning. And you wonder, again, how people did this for centuries, without heat, without comfort, without heat, without comfort, without fleece-lined anything. Some say they were tougher. Others say they were desperate. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly adapted to the cold, or whether they simply endured it out of necessity. Either way, your day has started, and the worst is yet to come. You step outside, boots crunching through the icy crust of snow. The air slices your face like thin knives, and your breath curls out in pale ghosts. Morning in a medieval winter doesn't feel like a new beginning. It feels like punishment for having survived the night. The light is blue and sharp, everything muffled in white, but there's no beauty in it, just cold. So much cold. The village around you stirs slowly. A door creaks open down the path. Someone else brave enough to face the frost. Smoke snakes from a few chimney holes, sluggish and gray. No one's talking. Everyone's busy not freezing to death. You trudge to the well, bucket clanging at your side. Water is essential, but the well's mouth looks more like the entrance to a frozen underworld. You knock the ice free, lower the bucket, and pray it hasn't frozen all the way through. The rope creaks as you pull, the icy weight dragging your shoulders. When you lift the bucket, your fingers stick to the handle slightly, skin kissing metal in ways it shouldn't. The walk back is harder. The snow's deeper now. It's hard to tell if it snowed more overnight or if the wind just reshuffled the misery. The water sloshes, freezing along the rim, already forming an icy crust. By the time you reach the cottage again, you feel like a statue of yourself. You set the bucket down inside and look around. You're not alone. Your family's here, wrapped in wool, sitting quietly, barely moving, conserving energy. Talking wastes heat. Even your breath is rationed. Someone's coughing in the corner, wrapped in more blankets than anyone else. That cough. It's been there a while, a little too wet. You all pretend it's nothing. The day's main event is coming. Work. The kind that keeps you alive. There's wood to chop, food to scavenge, repairs to make. You bundle up, 2 cloaks now, and head into the woods with an axe that has seen better centuries. The snow muffles everything, even the groan of the trees. Every swing of the axe feels like defiance. Wood chips fly like tiny rebels. Your breath huffs in time with each strike. But it's not just about keeping warm. Wood is currency. The more you chop, the more you can trade. Maybe for salted fish. Maybe for boots that don't leak. Maybe, if the stars align and someone owes you a favor, for a thimble of honey. Yes, honey. Liquid gold. You haven't tasted it in over a year. As you gather the chopped wood into your crude sled, a strange sound breaks the silence. Bells. Small, metallic, and distant. You squint through the trees and spot a figure trudging down the road. Thick cloak, a crossbow slung behind him. The tax collector, always arriving when you have the least. He's not early. He's not late. He's just inconveniently inevitable. You pretend not to see him and head back quickly, heart thudding faster than you'd like. Taxes aren't just coins, they're grain, hides, labor. And if you're short? Well, medieval justice doesn't exactly come with a warning label. Inside again, you drop the wood near the hearth. The fire is stronger now, crackling with satisfaction. You feed it greedily, and warmth, faint and fragile, begins to nudge the corners of the room. You sit beside it, legs outstretched, hands steaming with life again. Lunch, if you can call it that, is a broth. Mostly turnip water, with a few suspicious floaters that used to be vegetables. But the heat is everything. You sip slowly, savoring the illusion of fullness. Your stomach, at least, stops complaining. For now. And then comes the news. A neighbor pokes his head in the door, face flushed and grim. "Old John fell through the river," he mutters. "Didn't make it out." Nobody gasps, nobody panics, just a collective exhale. Part sorrow, part relief that it wasn't you. The river ice is always a gamble. One wrong step, and you're swimming in death. You nod, offer a wordless gesture of sympathy, and go back to your soup. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers had more resilience or simply less choice. Grief, after all, is a luxury when survival is full-time work. You think of John's family. They'll need firewood. Maybe you can trade them some. Maybe they'll trade you silence, the kind that lets you sleep without thinking too hard. Evening creeps in quickly. The sun gives up before dinner, leaving you once again at the mercy of flickering firelight and shadows that grow too long. You wrap yourself tighter, your fingers never quite warm, and try to ignore the aching in your joints. The cold is always inside you now, somewhere behind your ribs, humming softly. You lie down, listening again to the wind. A low, endless growl, like the earth itself is grumbling. Snowflakes drift in through a crack in the roof. You watch them melt on your blanket, vanishing without ceremony. Just like John. Sleep doesn't come easy. But when it does, it's shallow and strange, filled with dreams of sunlit fields that probably never existed. Your body rests because it has to. Your mind never does. And outside, the winter rolls on, indifferent and unrelenting. You wake up before the sun, not out of ambition. No one in a medieval winter wakes early for fun, but because the cold nudges you conscious. Your nose is the first to notice, aching from the frost in the air. The rest of your body joins in with a protest of creaks and tight muscles. Sleep helped, but only just. You curl deeper into the blanket, but the warmth you managed to build overnight is already fading like smoke. No use delaying. You peel yourself out of the straw-stuffed mattress and wince as your bare feet meet the icy floorboards. They sting instantly, like touching a frozen pan. You fumble to pull on socks. Wool, patched, damp. They don't help much, but they're better than the alternative. Every layer you add feels like armor, against weather, yes, but also against the mood the cold brings. Outside, it's still night. The sky is a deep iron gray, with no hint of sunlight yet. The animals are restless. A few chickens cluck in their wooden prison, likely wondering if they've been forgotten in this ongoing freeze. You trudge to the barn, not because you're eager, but because if you don't feed them now, you'll lose another food source. And unlike the river, they don't drown. They just quietly starve. Inside the barn, it smells like hay and damp fur. The goat, bleating softly, eyes you with both hope and disdain. She's cold, too, her breath visible in the gloom. You pour out what little feed you have left and refill the trough with water that's already trying to turn back to ice. The goat sniffs it skeptically. You're tempted to do the same. By the time you're done with chores, the light is beginning to shift, not rise, just shift. The kind of dim glow that hints at a sun somewhere behind the clouds, but offers no real evidence. You know this light. It means another gray day, another battle with dampness that seeps into bone and timber alike. The kind of weather that historians say worsened the so-called Little Ice Age, a period where Europe froze harder and longer than usual. Crops failed, villages thinned, and whispers of God's wrath got louder. You remember your neighbor's words from yesterday, about John and the river. A frozen graveyard, still hiding the body. You offer a silent prayer. Not for John, but that you won't share his fate. You've got a little more firewood today, a few more dried roots hidden behind the hearth. But winter isn't just outside. It's in your food, your water, your breath. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a hunk of coarse bread so dry it might as well be a building material. You chew slowly, each bite loud in the quiet room. Someone sneezes, the kind of sneeze that comes from inside the chest. You glance over. Your sister, wrapped in layers, red-nosed, pale, the same cough that's been bouncing through the house like a cold ghost. You try not to think about how many didn't survive last winter's fever. Historians still argue whether influenza or pneumonia was the deadlier killer during winters like these. But from your perspective, the distinction's academic. Either one can carry someone off in their sleep and there's no apothecary nearby. Not that you could pay him. Not that his concoctions worked most of the time. The best cure is heat. The best heat is firewood. And the best firewood is the kind someone else chopped. But that luxury is for richer families. You're rich in character, not coin. You check the food stores next. Root cellar first. It's not a room, just a hole with steps covered in frost. Inside, a few turnips, some wrinkled apples, dried legumes in a clay pot. You take a mental count, calculating how many days you can stretch this before desperation kicks in. One of the turnips looks suspiciously soft. Mold? Or just age? You set it aside anyway. No sense being picky in a famine. There's a sudden knock at the door. Sharp, quick. You freeze. Visitors are rare in this cold unless they need something. Or bring bad news. You open the door to find a boy from 2 cottages over, cheeks flushed from running. They're digging out the old road, he pants. Priest says it's too packed with snow for the burial. John. Even in death, he's causing problems. You nod, offer a grunt. Close the door slowly. The dead get more ceremony than the living sometimes, mostly to remind the rest of you that your turn's coming. You spend the afternoon helping with the digging. The snow is more like stone. Packed and frozen, it fights every shovel like it's alive. Your breath burns your lungs. You work in silence, shoulder to shoulder with others who also can't afford to be here, but came anyway. There's something comforting in that. Shared futility. As the sun droops, again, more of a shift than a set, you return home. Your fingers tingle from the thaw, and you're bone-weary. Dinner is stew, a generous word, mostly boiled water with flecks of something vaguely meaty. Could be squirrel, could be mystery. The important part is that it's hot. You sit by the hearth, staring into the flames. They flicker and pop like tiny fireworks. It's hypnotic. You wonder how something so dangerous can also feel like a friend. Fire kills, but it also remembers your name. A log cracks loudly, startles you. You chuckle softly at your own jumpiness. Behind you, someone giggles too. The cougher. Your sister. Still here, still breathing. That's something. You lay down again. The straw is unforgiving, but your body doesn't care anymore. Fatigue settles over you like a second blanket. The fire dims, shadows climb the walls, and outside, the wind begins to whisper once more. And somewhere not far from your dreams, the snow keeps falling. Quiet, endless, and utterly uninterested in your plans. You sleep lighter than you want to. Not because you choose to, but because the cold never quite lets go of your spine. It creeps in like an uninvited guest, curling between your ribs, settling behind your knees. The wind outside has picked up again, dragging its ghostly fingers across the shutters. You dream of summer, of sun-warmed stone and loaves fresh from the oven. You almost taste honey on your tongue, only to wake with your jaw clenched around nothing. The fire's gone out. Of course it has. You drag yourself up and poke the embers. Dead. You should have banked it better. But then again, wood doesn't grow on frozen trees. Every log has to be earned, and you're fresh out of favors with the neighbors. You consider whether it's worth braving the dark to fetch more from the stack outside, if it hasn't been stolen. Again, your breath fogs as you make the decision. You wrap your cloak tighter, pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday's digging, and step outside. The cold doesn't slap you, it buries you. There's something ancient in its grip. It doesn't just chill you, it weighs you down like a judgment. Every step to the firewood stack crunches with layers of old snow, compacted by weeks of weary boots. When you reach it, you see it's been picked through. Not gone, but lighter. You could accuse someone, but you've done the same thing before, haven't you? Not theft, you'd argued. Redistribution. A noble lie to keep your fingers warm. You take 3 logs, 1 for now, 2 for later. Any more, and you risk nothing for the morning. You return to the hearth, hands stinging as circulation kicks in. The wood hisses when it catches fire, reluctant but obedient. You hold your hands over the growing flame. That's when you hear it, someone coughing again. Not your sister this time, the neighbor's baby, through the wall. The sound carries too well in this weather. Historians still debate whether early villages were built too close together for safety or for warmth. Proximity helped share fire, share food, but also shared illness. A double-edged, snow-covered sword. With the room warming slowly, you glance at the ceiling beams. Frost clings to the edges, a strange sight inside a home. You wonder if the beams will sag with the weight of ice this season. Last winter, the tanner's roof collapsed under the snow. Buried his dog, missed him by inches. You remember the look in his eyes when he recounted it. Relief and guilt are strange bedfellows. Mid-morning, you venture into the woods. You need more than just firewood now. You need food. Not the soft kind from the market, which hasn't seen anything green in weeks, but the kind you snare or dig up with numb hands. You bring your trap lines and a prayer. You set them along a ridge where you saw hare tracks yesterday. If you're lucky, you'll have meat by dusk. If not, you'll be eating root broth again. The kind that tastes like disappointment. You dig into a drift near a dead log, searching for kindling. The ground is hard as iron. You chip away, fingers aching, knees damp. A squirrel scampers by, mocking you, probably. You're too slow to throw anything at it. Besides, you'd miss. You always miss. That's when you stumble upon something odd. An old iron horseshoe, half buried in the frozen earth. A relic from a warmer, forgotten day. You pocket it. Not because it's valuable, but because your grandmother used to say they brought luck. And right now, you need the superstition more than the logic. You return home with frozen hands and no catch. Your traps are empty, just like your stomach. But the horseshoe's weight in your pocket is oddly comforting. A reminder that not everything buried in winter stays lost. Inside, the mood is low. Your sister sleeps fitfully. Her forehead's hot. The fevers set in. You try to boil water, only to find the buckets frozen solid. You have to chip at it with a spoon. It's comical in a miserable sort of way. Dinner is a weak stew again. You add a pinch of herbs you traded for 2 weeks ago. Dried nettle and maybe thyme. It doesn't help the flavor much, but it smells like you're trying. Sometimes that's enough to convince your body that you're being taken care of. You feed your sister spoonfuls, blowing on each one until it cools. She winces with every swallow, but doesn't complain. That alone worries you more than anything. You murmur old songs as you tend to her, hoping that your voice can warm what fire cannot. As night creeps in, so does the wind. It howls now, properly howls, through the gaps in the shutters and under the eaves. You stack extra clothes on your sister's bed. She needs the warmth more than you. You lie on the floor near the hearth, close to the fire that's struggling to keep its promise. A crack in the ceiling drops a snowflake onto your cheek. You blink in surprise. It's a strange intimacy, to be kissed by weather inside your own home. You wonder, briefly, if nature is just trying to remind you who's in charge. Sleep takes you in fits and starts, the kind where you wake unsure of how much time passed. You check your sister's breathing more than once. You think it's steady. You hope it is. Outside, the world is locked in white. You can't see it, but you feel it. An entire landscape of frost and silence and buried things. Seeds, secrets, memories. And you're still here. For now. The morning light seeps through the cracks with a pale blue chill that stings your eyes. You groan softly, stiff from the cold floor and a restless night. You pull your cloak tighter around you and sit up, hearing your sister cough softly in the next room. Her illness hangs like a shadow, making the quiet house feel heavier. Outside, the snow has thickened. The world beyond your door is an endless white blur, a vast expanse of frozen nothingness. The sun barely rises these days, like a reluctant guest who shows up late to a dinner party and leaves early. You remember reading that medieval winters were brutal, like world-altering brutal, but living it feels like punishment designed just for you. You wrap your fingers around a chipped wooden cup filled with cold broth, the taste sharp and sour from sitting too long. It's all you have until you can manage to get more food. Your thoughts drift toward the village and its scattered faces, some pale with hope, others just pale. Your neighbor, old Tom, keeps saying this winter is a trial from the gods, but you think maybe the gods forgot to check the forecast. Historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age caused these harsh winters, or if it was just the cruel whims of the climate in Europe that dragged people into a frozen nightmare. Whatever the cause, it's clear the cold wasn't just a season. It was a slow siege. You decide to leave the house again, knowing full well the risks. Snowdrifts swallow the path, and the trees stand bare and brittle like ghosts. Your boots crunch with every step, the sound oddly comforting in the overwhelming silence. You pause to catch your breath and notice a cluster of icicles hanging from a low branch, jagged, shining like glass daggers. For a moment, you imagine the branch as a throne, and you as some winter king ruling over a frozen kingdom. You smile wryly. Ruling here means knowing how to survive, not how to conquer. In the nearby woods, you spot a hawk circling overhead. It's rare to see predators during the deep freeze. Most have either migrated or gone into hiding. The hawk's silhouette against the gray sky reminds you of the stories your grandfather told about the winter spirits who roamed the forests. Quirky, yes, but the idea of unseen forces watching over or punishing you fits the mood perfectly. Your search for food takes you to a frozen stream. The ice is thick, but you chip away at it, hoping to reach water. You know drinking stagnant water risks sickness, but you're running low. As you collect what you can, you spot something odd under the ice. Small bubbles rising slowly, like the river is breathing beneath its icy skin. This small sign of life feels almost like a miracle. You wonder if, despite all, life continues beneath the frozen surface, just as hope clings to the edges of your own tired heart. Back home, you try to warm yourself near the hearth. The fire crackles weakly, struggling to stay alive. You toss on the 3 logs you gathered yesterday, but they hiss and spit, reluctant to give up their warmth. You watch the flames dance, flickering like spirits trapped in the smoke. Your sister stirs, coughing more harshly this time. You place a cool cloth on her forehead and whisper soothing words you barely believe yourself. You remind her, and yourself, that spring will come again, that the sun will rise higher and stay longer, that this frozen prison will thaw. But as the wind howls outside and the frost creeps in through the shutters, you know it's not the fire or the sun that will save you. It's sheer stubbornness, grit, and a little bit of luck. The horseshoe in your pocket suddenly feels heavier, like a talisman against the cold and the darkness. And so, you sit, waiting for dawn, hoping for warmth, bracing for the next breath of winter's cruel enough. You trudge outside once more, the bitter wind cutting through your layers like a cold blade. The village seems quieter than usual, if that's even possible in a place where survival feels like a constant battle. Snow mounds pile up against the walls of half-frozen homes, and you notice footprints tracing a crooked path between them. Someone else is out here, struggling through the white nothingness just like you. You think of how people once believed that winter was the work of angry spirits or malevolent witches, trying to punish or control the living. It's a comforting thought, in a strange way, that the cold has an intention, a purpose. But you know better, or at least you hope so. Nature is indifferent. It doesn't care if you freeze or flourish. You make your way toward the town square, hoping for signs of life, maybe a trade or a friendly face. The square is a ghost town, except for a few desperate figures huddled around a communal fire pit. Smoke spirals upward, but the flames look weak. Someone's brought a goat, or what's left of one. You feel a pang in your stomach. Eating meat is a rare luxury these days, if you can find it before the wolves do. You remember reading that medieval winters could kill up to 20% of a region's population. That's 1 in 5, gone. People like you and your neighbors, caught between frost and famine. Historians still argue whether these deaths were mostly due to starvation, disease, or exposure. But for those living through it, it doesn't matter. The cold kills in layers. First the food, then the body, then the spirit. The fire crackles weakly near the square, and you see an old woman stirring a pot of something thick and gray. She looks up and offers a nod. No words, just a shared understanding. You nod back, the weight of unspoken suffering settling between you. A stray dog wanders close, ribs showing through its matted fur. It barks once, a sharp sound that cuts the silence. You reach into your pouch and find a crust of bread, the last piece you saved. You toss it gently toward the dog, who snatches it eagerly before retreating into the shadows. You wander further, past the frozen market stalls and shuttered windows. One shop displays cracked pottery covered in frost. Another has a pile of frozen vegetables, looking more like ice sculptures than food. You think about how your ancestors once celebrated winter with festivals and feasts. Now, it's a season of waiting, hoping to endure. As you pass a small chapel, you hear faint chanting from inside. A few villagers have gathered, their voices low and trembling. You step inside, warmth hitting you like a wave. The scent of burning candles mingles with damp wool and hope. The priest speaks of mercy, of light returning after darkness, but you catch the worried glances exchanged among the faithful. You remember the old stories of the Black Death, how it followed close behind cold winters, spreading like wildfire among weakened bodies. Some say the winter itself bred the pestilence. Others blame poor sanitation and crowded towns. Historians still argue about the real cause, but the fear was real enough. Outside, the wind howls again. You watch a thin curtain of snow swirl through the stained glass window, the colors bending in the storm. The world outside is relentless, but inside this fragile sanctuary, for a moment, You breathe a little easier. You step back into the cold, pulling your cloak tighter. The sun is low, barely touching the horizon. You head home with a renewed sense of quiet determination. Tomorrow will be another day to fight, to survive, to find warmth in the unlikeliest places. The night has settled in again, and with it comes a heavy silence that feels almost suffocating. You lie awake on your straw mattress, feeling the cold seep through the thin wool blanket. Your breath fogs the air in front of you, and every creak of the house sounds like an omen. You close your eyes, but can't stop your mind from wandering back to the stories of those who came before you, those who lived through the worst winters in medieval Europe. You remember that historians still argue whether the famous Great Famine of the early 14th century was caused solely by bad weather, or if poor harvests were worsened by human error, like overfarming or bad storage. Whatever the truth, millions perished, and the harsh winters that followed only made survival more brutal. In those days, the average temperature dropped by about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, seemingly small, but enough to shorten growing seasons, freeze rivers solid, and cover the land in snow that lingered far longer than it should have. The effect was devastating. Crops failed repeatedly, livestock died, and people began to starve. Your stomach growls softly, reminding you that you're just a modern version of that struggle. There's an old, almost forgotten trick your grandmother taught you, making a kind of crocodile dung sunscreen to protect skin from the harsh winter winds. Odd, right? But some of those strange, fringe medieval remedies might have saved lives, or at least spared some suffering. Of course, you won't be testing that tonight. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters and causing the thin glass panes to shimmer and shake. You imagine the trees outside, stripped bare, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. It's no surprise that many medieval folks believed winter was a living, breathing entity, a harsh goddess, or a cruel demon testing their faith. The fire in the hearth crackles low, struggling against the cold that presses through every crack and crevice. You poke at it gently, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The glow casts long shadows on the walls, making the familiar room feel eerie, like the house itself is holding its breath. You think about how the cold was not just an enemy outside, but a persistent intruder inside, invading homes and hearts. People burned anything they could find, old furniture, books, even clothing, to keep the frost at bay. Sometimes they huddled together for warmth, sharing stories and whispers to keep the loneliness and fear from consuming them. One particularly grim tale comes to mind, about villagers who resorted to cannibalism during a particularly brutal winter, something historians still debate today as either fact or dark legend. Either way, it paints a chilling picture of desperation. But amidst all this, you find a strange kind of comfort in the resilience of those who survived. The fact that people endured these endless winters, generation after generation, says something about the stubborn will to live. Even now, in your quiet room, you feel connected to that unbroken chain. As you finally drift toward sleep, the cold doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. It's a reminder of your ancestors' strength, and maybe, just maybe, a hint that dawn is waiting for you somewhere beyond the frozen night. Dawn breaks slowly, a pale wash of gray light spilling over the snow-covered landscape. You wake to the muffled sound of footsteps crunching outside and the low murmur of voices. Peeking through the frost-covered window, you see neighbors gathering near the well, an essential lifeline when pipes and rivers freeze solid. Water, you realize, is the lifeblood of survival in these medieval winters. Historians still argue whether medieval communities suffered more from water shortages or food scarcity during the harshest months, but both were relentless enemies. Wells would freeze, springs slowed, and traveling to fetch water became a dangerous chore that could cost you your life if you lingered too long. You bundle up and head outside, your boots sinking into the cold powder. The air is crisp, biting at your cheeks, and every breath feels like swallowing tiny shards of ice. You join the queue of villagers waiting to fill their containers, sharing nods and brief words, but mostly wrapped in a quiet tension. Everyone knows how precious each drop is. You overhear talk of a strange frost forming on the well's surface, an odd crystalline pattern that some claim has magical properties, a fringe belief passed down through generations. Others dismiss it as nothing but a trick of the light. This kind of mystery, mixed with desperation, was common in medieval villages, where science and superstition tangled tightly. Carrying your water back, you pass the bakery, where a thin plume of smoke struggles to escape the chimney. Bread is scarce, and what little is baked tends to be hard as stone, made from whatever grain could survive the frost. You remember that medieval ovens were often communal, shared by the whole village, which made the warm, yeasty smell of fresh bread all the more precious. A scholar once told you that, despite the harsh conditions, medieval winters helped foster a surprising sense of community. People depended on one another like never before. Yet there's still debate over how much this cooperation really offset the brutal hardships. Some villages turned inward, suspicious and protective, while others reached out to neighbors in need. Walking through the village, you notice signs of makeshift repairs. Wooden planks covering broken windows, straw stuffed into cracks, and animals huddled together in tiny shelters. The line between survival and surrender feels razor thin. You stop by the smithy, where the blacksmith is trying to keep the forge alive. The glow of molten metal is like a beacon in the gloom, but fuel is scarce. The smith mutters curses about the cold snapping his bellows and cracking his tools. You chuckle softly. There's always something breaking, isn't there? Even in the best of times. As you continue your rounds, you glimpse a group of children playing in the snow, their laughter surprisingly bright amid the gloom. You smile, remembering your own youthful escapes from the harsh realities outside. These moments of joy, no matter how fleeting, were the secret warmth that kept the heart beating through the long winter nights. The sun sinks lower, and you head home, water sloshing in your jug. Your fingers are numb, but your spirit feels steadied by the simple ritual of gathering life's essentials. Tomorrow the struggle will begin anew, but for now, there's a quiet satisfaction in having faced the cold and lived. Night descends once more, bringing a stillness that feels almost sacred. You settle back into your spot by the fire, the flickering flames casting a warm orange glow on the rough stone walls. Outside, the wind howls like a wild animal, rattling the shutters and making the wooden beams creak in protest. It's the kind of cold that burrows deep into your bones, reminding you just how small and vulnerable you really are. You think back to a chilling fact. Medieval winters were so severe that the River Thames in London froze solid multiple times during the 14th and 15th centuries, allowing for frost fairs, where people would set up stalls, dance, and even hold horse races right on the ice. It's a bizarre image. The city's bustling heart transformed into a frozen carnival. Yet historians still argue whether these events were joyful celebrations or desperate attempts to reclaim some semblance of normalcy amidst relentless hardship. Speaking of strange, you recall the odd medieval practice of snow burial. When the ground froze too hard to dig graves, the dead were sometimes wrapped in cloth and placed in the snow, left to freeze until the earth thawed enough for proper burial. Morbid? Yes. Practical? Apparently. It's a grim reminder that death and winter were intertwined companions, walking side by side through those dark months. You glance down at your hands, warming them by the fire, and remember the countless people who endured frostbite, chilblains, and gangrene, often without any real medical help. Remedies were a strange mix of herbal concoctions, prayers, and sometimes downright bizarre rituals. One popular belief was that wearing a piece of animal fur backward or carrying a rabbit's foot could ward off the winter's evil. You smirk. If superstition kept someone sane, maybe it wasn't so foolish after all. As the fire sputters, you stretch your legs and let your mind wander to the larger question scholars still debate. How much did these brutal winters influence the course of history? Did the relentless cold slow down wars, halt trade, or even help usher in the end of the medieval period by weakening populations? There's no simple answer, but the icy grip of winter certainly shaped the fate of nations. Your gaze drifts to the hearth's edge, where a small pile of dried herbs smolders gently, filling the air with a faint pine scent. You recall a quirky tidbit about medieval homes. Many kept bundles of herbs like rosemary, sage, and juniper, not just for scent, but because they believed these plants could purify the air and protect against illness, especially during the closed, stuffy winter months. It's funny how some ideas survive through the ages, evolving into the modern aromatherapy you know today. The fire dims, and your eyelids grow heavy. The cold remains just beyond the door, but here by the hearth, you feel the faint pulse of warmth, both physical and something deeper, a stubborn flicker of life amid the frost. You tuck yourself beneath your blanket, your thoughts drifting like the snowflakes outside, landing gently on memories of survival and the quiet courage of those who came before. The chill in the air presses closer as twilight fades into the dead of night. You lie awake, wrapped tightly in blankets that are threadbare and thin, the cold seeping through despite your best efforts. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just numb your skin, but seems to freeze your very soul. You imagine the endless, unforgiving winters medieval peasants endured, long, dark, and filled with uncertainty. One of the stark realities of those times was the sheer lack of heating. Castles might boast grand hearths, but most people's homes relied on little more than a small fire pit in the corner, barely enough to fend off the biting frost. Historians still argue whether central heating, like the Roman hypocaust, could have made a comeback in any meaningful way, or if the medieval lifestyle simply accepted the cold as inevitable. You think about how families often huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat beneath thin animal skins and tangled quilts. And yet, despite the closeness, winter was a lonely time. With daylight shrinking to just a few hours, social life slowed to a crawl, and people spent long nights in near isolation. You recall a quirky detail you read somewhere. In some northern villages, it was customary to sleep the winter, a sort of communal hibernation where people limited their movement and activities to conserve energy and warmth. It's fascinating how human beings instinctively found ways to adapt to such extreme conditions, even if it meant surrendering part of their waking life. Food was another battlefield. Preserving what little they had was crucial. People relied on salted meats, dried fish, and root vegetables stored in cellars. But these stores could spoil or be eaten by pests, leaving families to scavenge or fast. The odd medieval custom of eating candles or wax was sometimes reported, an eerie testament to desperation that modern minds struggle to fathom. Outside, the world turned to ice. Rivers and lakes froze over, sometimes thick enough to support the weight of carts and livestock. You imagine the frozen landscape stretching endlessly, silent except for the crunch of footsteps in snow. It was a world where every step could be a gamble, every night a test of will. You smile wryly, thinking about how people probably cursed the snow just as much as you do when it shows up uninvited. Still, there was a strange beauty in the silence and the pale, shimmering world the cold created. The frost etched delicate patterns on windows like nature's own artwork, and stars shone clearer than ever in the crisp air. You feel a growing appreciation for those who survived, not just physically but emotionally, through winters that could break even the strongest spirits. As you close your eyes, you imagine yourself among them, finding peace in the small fires of hope flickering in the darkest cold. Morning light filters weakly through the frost-coated window pane as you awaken, your breath visible in the chilly air. The relentless winter refuses to loosen its grip, and you know today will be no different from the countless days before. Life in medieval times during such winters was a slow grind, a test of endurance that wore down body and spirit alike. One hard fact to swallow is how medieval people coped with the near-constant threat of starvation. Grain harvests were often decimated by early frosts, and what little was stored could spoil or be stolen. Historians still argue whether famine was the ultimate killer in those winters, or if disease, worsened by malnutrition and cold, carried off more lives. Either way, hunger was an ever-present shadow. You wrap yourself tighter in your coarse wool cloak, heading outside to tend to the animals. Livestock were precious commodities, and their survival often meant the difference between life and death for a family. Yet, feeding them during the long winters was a monumental challenge. Farmers resorted to rationing hay and scavenging for any green shoots, a desperate gamble against the frozen earth. You recall a strange medieval belief. Some thought that if you whispered prayers to your animals or sang to them, they'd produce more milk and withstand the cold better. It sounds quirky now, but when every drop counted, any hope was clung to fiercely. As you check on the chickens nestled in their coop, you notice the odd behavior of one rooster crowing at midnight instead of dawn. Superstitious villagers might see this as an ill omen, a sign of impending doom. These beliefs intertwined with everyday survival, making the line between reality and myth a thin, blurred one. The village well is partially frozen, forcing you to chip away at the ice before drawing water. Nearby, children play cautiously, their games slowed by heavy mittens and boots. You remember that even during the harshest winters, people found ways to keep spirits up, whether through storytelling, music, or simply sharing a hearty laugh around the fire. A scholar once mentioned that medieval winters may have influenced major political shifts, as weakened populations made kingdoms vulnerable to invasion or rebellion. Historians still debate the extent of this impact, but the idea that winter shaped history itself adds a layer of gravity to the cold you feel now. You turn back toward the warmth of your home, heartened by the resilience of those who faced such brutal seasons without modern comforts. Their struggle echoes quietly, a reminder that survival is as much about spirit as it is about flesh. The icy wind bites at your cheeks as you step outside again, the frozen landscape stretching endlessly under a pale, weak sun. You pull your cloak tighter, savoring the fleeting moments of daylight before darkness claims the village once more. Winter here isn't just a season, it's an adversary, relentless and unforgiving. One historical fact strikes you sharply. The Little Ice Age, which gripped Europe from roughly the 14th to the 19th century, brought winters so harsh that crops failed year after year, rivers froze solid, and entire villages vanished under the weight of snow and ice. Historians still argue about what caused this prolonged chill. Was it volcanic eruptions, solar cycles, or simply nature's own cruel whim? You pause to consider the strange medieval invention called the ice house, a sort of primitive refrigerator. Wealthier estates dug deep pits, insulated them with straw, and stored blocks of ice cut from frozen lakes during winter to preserve food through warmer months. It's a fascinating glimpse into how humans adapted, turning ice, a symbol of death, into a tool for survival. Your thoughts wander to more peculiar medieval remedies for the cold. People believed that wearing warming stones or charms, like a piece of amber or a polished carnelian, could draw heat into the body or protect against frostbite. You smile. Modern science may scoff, but the power of belief is nothing to underestimate when temperatures drop to bone-chilling lows. You notice a thin layer of hoarfrost sparkling on the branches, delicate crystals forming overnight like nature's own lacework. The sight is hauntingly beautiful, yet a reminder of the moisture in the air, which could turn deadly when it froze inside your clothes or hair. Such hazards made every trip outdoors a gamble. A local storyteller once told you about the winter wolves, shadowy figures said to roam the frozen forests, spirits or perhaps wild animals blamed for disappearances and strange sounds in the night. You chuckle softly. Folklore provided comfort and caution in equal measure, weaving mystery into the mundane. You return indoors, the familiar scent of burning pine wood filling your lungs. The harshness of the cold outside sharpens your gratitude for these moments of warmth, for the small sanctuary carved from the relentless winter. It's a fragile piece, held together by firelight, stories, and the stubborn human will to endure. You sit by the fire, its warm glow flickering shadows across the rough stone walls, while outside, the wind howls like a mournful ghost through the cracks of your humble home. The cold has a way of silencing everything except itself, filling the empty spaces with a biting presence you can't ignore. In these dark, frozen hours, your thoughts drift to the harsh realities medieval people faced, and to the strange ways they fought back against the winter's cruelty. A fact you remember. Medieval winters were deadly not just because of the cold, but because of the rampant spread of illness. Frostbite, pneumonia, and respiratory infections were common killers, especially for children and the elderly. Historians still argue whether these illnesses spread more from the harsh environment or from malnutrition and cramped living conditions. It was a perfect storm of vulnerabilities. Among the many curious customs you find yourself recalling, there's one about snow medicine, a treatment where fresh snow was used to treat wounds or fevers. Sounds a little counterintuitive now, right? Yet, for a fevered body, the cold shock of snow was believed to draw out illness or reduce fever. It's one of those medieval remedies that modern science sometimes nods to. After all, cold therapy has its place even today. Outside, the world is transformed into an endless white canvas, broken only by the dark silhouettes of bare trees and the footprints of wildlife braving the frozen forest. You picture villagers sneaking out at night to trap animals or gather firewood, aware that each outing could be their last. In these conditions, survival was an all-consuming priority, a relentless focus that left little room for anything else. You think about how winter shaped not only daily life, but the calendar itself. Festivals like Yule or Candlemas offered brief but vital respite, moments of warmth, light, and community in the otherwise bleak months. You probably wouldn't survive those dark days without the hope these traditions brought. Tiny beacons of human defiance against the endless cold. You lean back, feeling the fire's warmth seep into your bones, and wonder at the resilience required to live through such winters. Each breath you take feels heavier, slower, as if the cold outside tries to reach inside you, to slow time itself. But here, by the fire, you're safe, held by the steady pulse of heat and light, a fragile oasis amid the brutal truth of medieval winters. The frost clings stubbornly to the edges of the window, a shimmering barrier between you and the frozen world outside. You hear the muffled crunch of footsteps in the snow, villagers returning from a long day of gathering wood or hunting what little game remains. The air smells sharp and clean, a reminder that even in the harshest winters, life stubbornly pushes forward. One mainstream fact is the immense toll winter took on medieval agriculture. The short growing seasons meant that crops had to be harvested quickly before frost claimed them. Fields left fallow during cold years could starve entire regions. Historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age's climate shifts directly triggered social upheavals like famines and peasant revolts, but the connection seems undeniable. You recall a quirky piece of folklore about witch bottles, protective charms filled with odd items like nails, hair, and urine, buried under thresholds to ward off evil spirits believed to be especially active during the dark months. People clung to these superstitions because, honestly, when survival is on the line, you'll try anything, even if it sounds absurd. Outside, the village dogs bark, their breath steaming in the cold air, and you remember how animals themselves adapted. Some animals entered a deep torpor, conserving energy, while others grew thick winter coats. It's nature's way of battling winter's assault, a survival game that humans learned to read and respect. You step back inside, the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards reminding you of home. As the fire crackles, you think about how winter's grip didn't just freeze the land, it also shaped culture, mythology, and human psychology. The fear, the isolation, the intense need for community all sprouted in the frost. A scholar once noted that winter was a sort of great equalizer in medieval society. Regardless of status, the cold demanded respect and humility. Historians still debate how this shaped class relations or even religious fervor, but it's clear the seasons influenced more than just the food on the table. You breathe deeply, the warmth a gentle defiance against the brutal truth that winter is an unyielding force, one you'll wrestle with every year. Yet, here you sit, alive, warmed by fire and story, a witness to the endurance of those long-ago souls. The fire crackles low as the long night stretches ahead, the cold outside settling into a deep, bone-chilling stillness. You feel the weight of centuries past, when medieval winters didn't just chill the air, they tested every ounce of human grit, shaping lives in ways we can barely imagine today. One clear fact stands out. The sheer hardship of these winters forced communities to innovate in their survival strategies. From stockpiling root vegetables to breeding hardier livestock, people adapted slowly but surely. Historians still argue whether these adaptations were enough to stave off disaster year after year, but the struggle was relentless. You remember a curious practice called warming stones, heated rocks placed in beds to stave off frostbite during frigid nights. It's a simple idea, but a clever reminder of medieval ingenuity, blending practical necessity with a hint of comfort. As the wind moans softly outside, you reflect on the deep cultural imprint winter left. It inspired tales of frost giants, icy spirits, and miraculous rebirths in spring. These stories gave hope when daylight was scarce and temperatures unforgiving, a psychological balm for the harshness of survival. You close your eyes and imagine the gradual thaw, the soft drip of melting icicles, the first brave crocus pushing through snow. It's a fragile promise of life returning, a quiet ignition after the long freeze. And as you settle deeper into your bed, cocooned from the cold, remember this: Winter's brutality was not just a test of flesh and bone, but of spirit. You carry that same resilience now as you drift toward dreams warmed by stories of survival, struggle, and the undying flicker of hope. The fire's warmth fades gently as your eyelids grow heavy, the sharp edges of the world softening into shadows and whispers. The long winter's tale settles like a quiet snow, blanketing your mind with calm. There's no rush here, no harsh winds, only the gentle hum of quiet, like a lullaby sung by centuries of endurance. Feel the cold ease away, replaced by a slow, comforting warmth that fills your chest and limbs. The sharp frost that once gnawed at your skin melts into a tender, peaceful glow. Imagine the soft rustle of trees waking to spring's gentle breath, the slow dance of sunlight on thawed earth. Breathe deeply and let go of all the worries that winter's harshness stoked. Tonight you are safe, wrapped in warmth, carried on the soft currents of history's whispered stories. Tomorrow is far away, and the cold a distant memory. Rest now. Sleep deeply. Let the fire inside you burn steady and bright, even as the world outside lies silent beneath its blanket of frost. Sweet dreams.